Honorable members, Madam Deputy, honorable members, please be reminded that the question before the House is that a credit reporting bill be read a second time. Honorable Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Through consultation, Mr. Speaker, and in reference to Standing Order number 24, which allows us to give a motion without notice, I would like to ask for a motion that we suspend the debate on this bill and that we allow the special select subcommittee to reconvene, Mr. Speaker, and to allow that committee to formalize the amendments that are being made so that we can continue the debate once those amendments have been formalized.
Honorable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the member for Castries North adequately described the events that took place at the ad hoc committee meetings, and there were several concerns which he has documented, and these concerns are of a nature that we think that the original bill, they should be incorporated in the original bill. So I think that we will agree that the bill go back into the committee stage so that we can make the necessary adjustments and bring a revised bill to the Parliament after consultation with all the bodies that have had input into the committee. So I think I agree. Second the motion.
Honorable members, the question now is that the debate on the credit reporting bill be adjourned and that the Special Select Committee continue its work to bring a final report to this House. Member for Swaziland Saltibus.
Mr. Speaker, I don't want to question the authority of the House, but just a question, and you'd so guide me, because I think during our deliberations, we may have suggested that we don't have the authority as a committee, and we have to go to the committee stage to get that authority. Just to guide me, I just want to be clear on it.
I will say to you that the House at any time can put a special select committee in place to look at any issue that the House believes that a committee should look into. The question, I believe, was whether or not the committee should have been placed after the second reading before we move into third reading. To me, it's not a question that affects the integrity of the debate and the way we move forward. Because yes, amendments can only be made within the committee of the House, of the whole House. However, there's nothing which prevents a select committee from proposing amendments which this committee of the whole House will take up. I hope you understand the difference. So the special committee can propose that Section 1 be amended That's a proposal. But that cannot take effect until the committee of the entire House says Section 1 will be amended. You understand? Very well. So I now put a question, as many as are, or for clarity, that let me put a question again, that the debate on the credit reporting at this time be adjourned. Mr. Prime Minister, are we given a timeline? By that the debate on the credit reporting bill be adjourned to January, and that the Special Select Committee continue its work to bring a final report to this House. I now put a question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. As many as of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Honorable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move for the first reading of a bill shortly entitled Economic Substance Amendment.
Economic Substance Amendment.
Mr. Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move for the suspension of Standing Order number 48-2 to allow the bill to go through its remaining stages at this sitting.
Honorable members, the question is that Standing Order number 48-2 be suspended to allow the Honorable Prime Minister to proceed with the bill at the remaining, proceed with all the stages of the bill at this sitting. I now put the question in. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. As many as of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Please proceed.
Speaker, I beg to move for the second reading of a bill shortly entitled Economic Substance Amendment. The bill for consideration of this Honorable House is the Economic Substance Amendment Bill. The purpose of the bill is to amend the Economic Substance Act number 33 of 2019 to improve the monitoring and compliance framework of the Act to allow for better oversight of entities operating in the financial services sector and to strengthen the economic substance requirements within our jurisdiction. St. Lucia is a signatory to numerous international agreements and conventions for the reduction and the elimination of tax evasion and avoidance. In order to improve good governance in tax matters and maintain its rating as a compliant nation in the international financial community, St. Lucia in 2019 passed the Economic Substance Act. A review of the Act and the further to discussion with St. Lucia's international partners, it was indicated that there was a need to strengthen the monitoring requirements for the purpose of satisfying St. Lucia's commitments to organizations, such as the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, and the European Union. Mr. Speaker, when the Economic Substance Act was passed in December of 2019, it was anticipated that it would be sufficient to enable St. Lucia to be removed from the European Union's annex, the Grey List. The EU subsequently requested that further amendments were needed to bring the ESA closer to their standards and avoid the possibility of St. Lucia being placed on the blacklist. Mr. Speaker, St. Lucia's situation is unique in that the foreign source income exemption, which enables all local companies earning foreign source income, including the international business companies, to have this income exempt from taxation, is seen by the EU as a continuation of the ring fencing which St. Lucia worked hard to eliminate. The EU, Mr. Speaker, indicated that the legislation needed to be amended to ensure, one, that any intellectual property income benefiting from the foreign income tax exemption be subject to what is referred to as the nexus approach, and two, that the term trademarks be removed from the definition of intellectual property. In their view, this would ensure that income which did not benefit from the related expenses would gain an advantage by exemption from taxation under St. Lucia's territorial tax regime. Mr. Speaker, the nexus approach attributes a benefit to the proportion of expenses that are directly related to or incurred in the creation of intellectual property income. The proposal today for the amendment of the Economic Substance Act is beyond St. Lucia's powers. Mr. Speaker, all has been done to negotiate with the EU, who've demanded the change. The government is working assiduously to ensure that the impact of these amendments are minimal and that we continue to foster the environment of growth that is inclusive of all entities operating within our jurisdiction. The government is committed to working closely with the affected sector, the Organization of Economic Cooperation, OECD, and the EU in order to ensure that St. Lucia continues to benefit from its good standing in the international community as it relates to tax transparency and fair taxation. Mr. Speaker, St. Lucia at this moment, especially with COVID-19 pandemic, can ill afford to be blacklisted. We cannot afford the reputational damage and the negative sanctions that the EU has requested that its individual member countries apply to countries which are blacklisted. In Section 2 of the Act, Mr. Speaker, there is the amendment of the following definitions. High-risk intellectual property. This definition was altered in keeping with the removal of the term trademarks from the definition of IP assets. The removal of trademarks necessitated as well the removal of marketing and branding, as these activities are associated with trademarks. Holding company. It was determined that the current definition of a holding company was very narrow and did not capture the standards set by the OECD. The new definition mirrors the OECD standard as set out in its BEPS Action 5 report of 2015 and is broad enough to ensure that the relevant entities meet their obligations. Holding companies in this relevant sector will be those that earn interest, rents, and royalties. This is in keeping with the focus of the OECD as it relates to economic substance. The OECD definition is presented in the appendix. Intellectual property. Although St. Lucia originally used a definition available to no or non-tax jurisdiction, which refers to 2.2 jurisdictions like Barbados, the EU requested that the definition of intellectual property be amended to reflect the requirements of jurisdictions with corporate tax. In accordance with this, standard trademarks have been removed from the definition of intellectual property. The associated reference to the core income generating activities of marketing and branding have also been removed. Mr. Speaker, in addition to the changes mentioned previously, the term intellectual property assets has been redefined to state definitively what such an asset is, as opposed to what it includes. This amendment also broadens the definition of the term encompass, an intangible asset that is non-obvious, useful, or novel, and other similar intangible assets that are functionally equivalent to a patent. Pure equity holding company. This definition, Mr. Speaker, was also altered to mirror the OECD standards more closely. This was necessary as there was uncertainty as to what entities would fall in this category. The distinction between pure equity holding and other entities is critical, as such entities are not required to file ESA returns, but are required to comply with various other pieces of legislation, including the Income Tax Act. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, the term has been redefined to remove wholes, the majority of voting rights, which was replaced with wholes voting rights. This is essential since the reference to majority of the voting rights may potentially exclude companies which should be covered by the Act based on the OECD standards. Mr. Speaker, based on feedback from the offshore sector, it was determined that Section 11.1 was not clear. The intention was for very relevant entity to have adequate economic substance, whether or not profit or income was derived from the carrying on the venture. The current wording was, however, interpreted to mean that if no income was earned, then the entity was not subject to the Act. This indeed was not the intention. As it now reads, all relevant entities which operate or carry out activities or derive income from a relevant sector will be subject to the ESA. Mr. Speaker, Section 11A is a new provision and gives the competent authority the ability to monitor and enforce collection of information to satisfy that economic substance requirements have been met. The implementation of effective international tax standards requires monitoring and enforcement. It was recognized that the Act did not allow the competent authority to adequately monitor filing compliance of entities. As a result, it is proposed that the Act be amended to require that all the competent authority be given these powers. Mr. Speaker, the amendment also provides for a notice to be served on a relevant entity by the competent authority to facilitate monitoring. The relevant entity must consent to the competent authority's request for the purpose of conducting its auditing and monitoring function. In Section 11.7, Mr. Speaker, the EU also requested that a statement be made so only intellectual property assets can qualify for the exemption on income occurring from a source outside of St. Lucia, foreign source exemption, if said entity can demonstrate a direct relationship between income arising from the asset and expenditure that contributes to the generation of the income. That is the nexus approach. In applying this approach, regard will be given to the CARICOM double taxation agreement. Section 7A to 7E and Schedule 2 reflect the formula and the parameters to be used in relation to the nexus approach calculation. The formula to be used is defined in Schedule 2 of the bill. Amendment of Section 12. Mr. Speaker, as a consequence of the amendment of Section 11.7, Section 12, which identifies the core income generating activities for holding intangible assets, has been amended to remove activities associated with trademarks. As this item has been removed from the definition of intellectual property asset. Mr. Speaker, it is also proposed that the Act be amended to provide a grace period of 12 months in the first instance for filing an economic substance return for a relevant entity, an exempted entity under Section 3 of the Act. This is necessary as the request guidelines and reporting portal have not finalized, pending consultation with the EU and the offshore sector. Relevant entities will file 3 months after the end of the year income in subsequent years. Mr. Speaker, a new Section 18A allows for the competent authority to apply a penalty if it is determined that an entity has willfully falsified information. As is the norm, however, the competent authority will not resort to penalizing entities for inaccuracies recognized in the first instance of filing. The goal of the competent authority remains to encourage compliance of all entities while meeting international tax standards. Mr. Speaker, the insertion of a new Section 23 is to arrange the schedules as a result of the intention of the new Schedule 2. Mr. Speaker, with this being said, I present to the Honourable House this bill for consideration. This will allow St. Lucia to be in compliance with the OECD and the EU as it relates to tax transparency and fair taxation. Mr. Speaker, we also ensure that the amendments did not adversely impact the offshore sector as it remains a viable sector within our economy. The offshore companies provide employment to many persons and also contributes to the government's tax revenue. As such, we intend to foster a healthy and stable business environment for the companies to continue operating while satisfying the requirements of international tax oversight and monitoring organizations. Mr. Speaker, this has been a very vexing issue for several months, and one of the negative impacts as to finalizing the economic substance components that we've just discussed, Mr. Speaker, is that the guidelines that are required to support this act could not be finalized. And in not having the guidelines, Mr. Speaker, it certainly has affected our competitiveness in this sector, as many companies have understood the new territorial tax structure, but there needed to be further definitions on certain elements of it. And in the absence of clear definition, it created uncertainty. And Mr. Speaker, uncertainty is the worst thing that you need in this sector. And I am satisfied, Mr. Speaker, having met with the RAs myself and listening to them, that there has been a thorough integration or involvement by them and the Ministry of Finance. And And so I am satisfied that everyone is on the same page. I want to take this time to thank staff members in Inland Revenue and also in the Ministry of Finance and the AG's office. I also want to thank all those RAs who have given their time freely, Mr. Speaker, in assisting us in making sure that we have a sector that is legal and considered to be transparent by the EU, and we're no longer going to be on the blacklist, but at the same time competitive. And Mr. Speaker, that has been a very difficult balance to find, but I am satisfied in what we have achieved here, that we have been able to, in fact, find a balance. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm hoping that we can get the support of my colleagues in Parliament in order for us to pass this bill. And again, I apologize that we have to go through all stages, but sadly we're under a very tight timeline with the EU, and this needs to be done before the end of the year. So again, I beg the indulgence of the members, but I want to give them my assurance that the RAs and the sector have been well briefed and have been involved in these amendments. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable members, the question is that the Economic Substance Amendment Bill be read a second time. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. As many as of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
An act to amend the Economic Substance Act number 33 of 2019.
Honorable members, let's get back to business. Members, let's review the bill. Clause 2.
Interpretation.
Clause 2 stands part of the bill. Clause 3.
Amendment of Section 2.
Clause 3 stands part of the bill. Clause 4.
Amendment of Section 8.
Clause 4 stands part of the bill. Clause 5.
Amendment of Section 11.
Clause 5 stands part of the bill. Clause 6.
Insertion of new Section 11A.
Clause 6 stands part of the bill. Clause 7.
Amendment of Section 12.
Clause 7.
Amendment of Section 12.
Clause 7 stands part of the bill. Clause 8.
Amendment of Section 13.
Clause 8 stands part of the bill. Clause 9.
Insertion of new Section 18A.
Clause 9 stands part of the bill. Clause 10.
Amendment of Section 23.
Clause 10 stands part of the bill. Clause 11.
Substitution of the schedule.
Clause 11 stands part of the bill. Clause 12.
Insertion of new Schedule 2.
Clause 12 stands part of the bill. Clause 1.
Short title.
Clause 1 stands part of the bill. Honorable members, the question is that the committee rises and the bill be reported. I now put a question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. As many as of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Honorable members, I beg to report that the bill went through the Economic Substance Amendment Bill went through committee with no amendments. Honorable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the report of the committee be adopted and the bill be read a third time and passed.
Honorable members, the question is that the Economic Substance Amendment Bill be read a third time and passed. I now put a question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. As many as of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Be it enacted by the Queen's Most Excellent Majesty, by and with the advice and consent of the House of Assembly and the Senate of St. Lucia, and by the authority of the same as follows. This act may be cited as the Economic Substance Amendment Act 2020.
Honorable members, during the course of the debates, members may have wanted to take the opportunity to wish their constituents or say anything to that effect. Before I call on the Prime Minister to move for the adjournment, I would like to give any member who may wish to so do, if you have not done it before, that opportunity. If not, I will now call on the Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Certainly what I'd like to do is maybe express on behalf of Parliament and all parliamentarians to the citizenry of St. Lucia, I think it's safe for me to say that we would all like to commiserate with St. Lucians, both living here and abroad, with the year 2020. I think it's a year, according to a past president, that will go down in infamy. As I said, it's a year that has brought a tremendous amount of pain to individuals, but it's also, I think, an event that has reminded us of some of the more simpler things in our lives. So again, on behalf of all parliamentarians to all St. Lucians, is for us to wish you a safe Christmas season. And by safe, the meaning that maybe this year calls for a little bit more of conservation, staying at home, staying with family members, and trying to resist the typical thing that we're known for, which is our partying and our enjoyment, our joie de vivre. But this year requires for a certain amount of constraint, Mr. Speaker. And I think that we really want to appeal to all St. Lucians that while it may appear that we have overcome a crisis recently with the COVID outbreak, but it's to always be reminded that it's only one day away. The behavior of some individuals that try to disregard the need for protocols could affect all of us. So I'm asking all St. Lucians to please to continue to practice good protocols, social distancing, wearing a face mask, hand sanitization, and proper body hygiene. But I also want to say to all St. Lucians that we're hoping for a prosperous and a better 2021. And that I hope that persons will continue to behave appropriately, but more importantly, Mr. Speaker, I'm appealing to corporations and individuals alike that this year more so than any other year, that we reach out to be each other's brother's keeper. And I'm really hoping that everybody would put that to practice. If we can adopt somebody who's less fortunate than ourselves this year, and reach out would be a meaningful gesture, and I think a welcome one by everybody in our society. So again, Mr. Speaker, I want to say to my constituents in Micoud, my best wishes for them in 2021. And again, I want to say to you, Mr. Speaker, to the parliamentary staff that are here, thank you for an outstanding year, very trying year, under very different circumstances. And you've certainly showed tremendous leadership, Mr. Speaker, and your staff have shown tremendous leadership. I want to say again, thank you to the police officers who are here. I want to thank NTN that have allowed these shows to be on. And regardless of what time that we've been finishing at, and there's been many times this year that we've finished way past the midnight hour. So I want to thank you all for your level of support, and certainly for the staff downstairs that are preparing the meals and making us feel as comfortable as possible during these very difficult times. I also want to thank the Ministry of Finance, the Attorney General's office that have been constantly here, and the other PSs and the other ministries who have made themselves available to the House during this year. And again, Mr. Speaker, I want to thank you for everything, and I wish everyone a very safe and prosperous new year. Mr. Speaker, I beg the House be adjourned sine die.
Honorable members, on behalf of yourself and myself, I would like to join the Prime Minister in expressing gratitude to all and sundry. The question is that the House do stand adjourned sine die. I now put a question. As many as are of that opinion say aye. As many as of a contrary opinion say no. Is there a division coming? I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. House is adjourned.
Thank you for staying with the broadcast. We've come to the end of the sitting of Parliament. The session saw a number of motions being presented, including that Parliament, by affirmative resolution, approves the draft value-added tax amendment of Schedule 3, Number 2 order, which amends Schedule 3 of the Act to exempt imports by an elected parliamentarian for the benefit of children, the vulnerable, and the needy persons in the constituency of the elected parliamentarian, of toys, food supplies, care packages, including items for personal use, such as food, personal hygiene products, and other personal protective supplies, gift items, including personal presents to be given as part of the Christmas holiday season, Christmas decorations, including Christmas lights, ornaments, and accessories used for decorative purposes during the Christmas holiday season. The second motion, be it resolved that Parliament authorizes the Minister for Finance to borrow from commercial banks sums not exceeding $85 million as follows. Royal Bank of Trinidad and Tobago, $4,400,000 EC dollars. Royal Bank of Canada, $5,600,000 EC dollars. First Caribbean International Bank, $8 million EC dollars. Republic Bank EC Limited, $12 million EC dollars. First National Bank of St. Lucia Limited, $5 million, and Bank of St. Lucia, $15 million EC dollars. There were also two bills, however, in the credit reporting bill. The Prime Minister and Minister for Finance presented a motion requesting that the debate be adjourned and allow the credit reporting specially appointed committee to continue its review of that bill, and so that it would be debated at a later date. The Economic Substance Amendment Bill went through committee stage with no amendments and was read a third time and passed. Thank you so much again for joining us for the broadcast. Please join us on Thursday, 17th December 2020 at 10 a.m. for the sitting of Senate. On behalf of the Government Information Service, do have a good night.